The Cinder Basin wasn't a place you found by accident. It was a place you went to disappear. A deep, jagged scar of red rock and shadow in the Arizona Territory. It had one entrance, one exit, and one permanent resident. Elias Thorne. He was checking the spring in the south corner of his box canyon when he heard the echo. It wasn't the sound of his own horse, or the familiar click of falling rock. It was the sound of shod hooves, many of them, moving with the metallic precision of trained riders. Elias froze, his hand dropping to the worn grip of the 1873 Winchester he always carried. He was a man in his late 50s, but his eyes were ancient, carrying the weight of 100 bad decisions. He'd been a Pinkerton for 20 years, a ghost who'd done unforgivable things in the name of progress and pay. This canyon was his penance, his hiding place from the world and from himself. He scrambled up the rocks, his breath catching in the thin, dry air. Far below, at the mouth of his canyon, 3 men sat on horseback, staring up at his small, defiant cabin. 2 of them he didn't recognize. But the one in the middle, oh, he knew that one. Bartholomew Black Croft, a man who devoured land the way a locust swarm devoured a field. Croft was the railroad, and the railroad was coming. Elias had known this day would arrive. His canyon held the only deep-water spring in 50 miles, and it was the only viable pass through the Razorback Mountains. Croft needed it, and Croft always got what he needed. But as Elias watched, a 4th rider emerged from the dust behind them. This one wore a U.S. Marshal's badge that glinted sharp and final in the morning sun. Elias felt his stomach turn to ice. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an execution. Elias Thorne hadn't always been a recluse. 20 years ago he'd been a different man. A colder man. He was the lead agent on a Pinkerton contract, hired to clear the Red Valley for a mining company. They'd called it pacification. It was a massacre. They hit the Kiowa camp at dawn. It was over in 10 minutes. As he walked through the smoking ruins, the silence broken only by the whimpers of the dying, something inside him finally shattered. He'd seen too much, done too much. Behind a burning lodge he found a boy. No more than 10 years old. The boy was covered in his mother's blood, his eyes wide with a silent, bottomless terror that mirrored Elias's own. Their eyes locked. The other agents were shooting survivors. Elias's orders were clear, but he couldn't. He looked at the boy, then at the smoking revolver in his own hand. He'd become a monster. In that moment, he made a choice. He grabbed the boy, dragged him to the creek, and washed the blood from his face. He pulled the last of his hardtack and a full canteen from his saddlebag and pushed them into the boy's hands. Then, in the ultimate act of betrayal to his old life, he unhitched his own horse, the best horse in the detail, slapped the boy onto its back and hit its rump hard. "Ride east," Elias whispered, his voice cracking. "Don't stop. Don't ever look back." The boy vanished into the smoke. Elias Thorne walked back to his men, reported the horse stolen, took his pay, and disappeared. He'd spent the next 20 years in the Cinder Basin, waiting for the ghosts of the Red Valley to come and claim him. Now it seemed, they finally had. The 3 riders hadn't moved. Elias took a deep breath, checked the load in his rifle, and began the long, slow walk down to the canyon floor. He stopped 30 yards from them, his rifle held loosely at his side. "Thorne," Bartholomew Croft said, his voice smooth and oily. He was a big man in a black suit, his face pale and soft. "You've become difficult to find." "I like it that way," Elias said, his voice a dry rasp. He nodded at the badge. "Marshal?" The marshal, a man named Flint, looked tired. He had the weary eyes of a man who sipped seen too much, but who still believed in the law, even when it was ugly. "Elias Thorne," Flint said, his voice official. "I have a warrant for your arrest." The words hung in the still air. A warrant? Elias had expected a land claim, a forced buyout, not a warrant. Arrest? For what? This time the 3rd man spoke. Judge Silas Vane, a thin, weasel-faced man who served as Croft's legal shadow. For the murder of Thomas O'Malley, Vane snapped. A railroad surveyor missing 3 weeks. Elias stared. I haven't seen another soul in 6 months. I don't know any O'Malley. He was last seen heading into this canyon. Judge Vane pressed, surveying Mr. Croft's new railroad line. A line you have repeatedly refused to sell passage for. Seems you took matters into your own hands. That's a lie, Elias said, but the cold dread was settling in. He saw the trap, clean and perfect. O'Malley was dead, no doubt, killed by Croft's own men and buried somewhere convenient. And he, the crazy recluse in the canyon, was the perfect scapegoat. We have a witness, Croft said, smiling. One of my men saw you arguing with O'Malley at the canyon mouth. Saw you raise your rifle. It's a lie, Elias shouted, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. That's for a court to decide, Judge Vane said, his voice dripping with false piety. And I am the court in this county. Marshal Flint shifted in his saddle, his eyes on Elias. Mr. Thorne, my warrant is legal and signed by the judge. I'm here to take you in. You can come peaceful or you can come hard, but you're coming. Elias looked at the three of them. Croft, the power. Vane, the law. Flint, the gun. There was no escape. They'd hang him in a quiet yard, file the land claim on his abandoned property, and the railroad would come through by spring. The ghosts had won. He was about to lower his rifle, to finally give in when he heard it. It started as a low rumble, a vibration in the soles of his boots. It wasn't the shod hoof echo of the marshal's horses. This was a different sound, a softer, more organic thunder. What in God's name is that? Marshal Flint said, pulling his horse back as the ground began to tremble. Elias looked past them, toward the single narrow mouth of the cinder basin. His eyes, the eyes of a man who had lived in this canyon for 20 years, widened in disbelief. No, Elias whispered. It can't be. The mouth of the canyon was filling, not with men, but with riders. Dozens of them, then 50, then 100. They poured into the basin in absolute disciplined silence. Kiowa, painted for war. They fanned out, forming a perfect terrifying crescent, sealing the only way out. They blocked the pass, their lances and rifles catching the morning sun. They didn't shout, they didn't charge, they just appeared. Bartholomew Croft's face went from pale to ashen. Judge Vane looked like he might faint. Even Marshal Flint's hand hovered near his pistol, his face a mask of disbelief. The Kiowa hadn't been seen this far south in a generation. And then the riders parted. A single warrior rode forward. He was tall, his face a canvas of old scars and new paint. He carried no rifle, only a long feathered lance. He rode not a painted pony, but a magnificent bay stallion, a breed Elias knew, a breed he recognized. The warrior stopped 20 yards from the marshal, his gaze sweeping over Croft and Vane with utter contempt. Then his eyes found Elias. The warrior stared at Elias, a long, unblinking look that crossed 2 decades. He didn't smile, he didn't speak. He simply raised his hand and tapped his own chest, twice, over his heart. Elias Thorne felt the air leave his lungs. The ghosts of the Red Valley hadn't come to claim him. They had come to save him. He slowly, numbly tapped his own chest in reply. The warrior was no longer a boy. He was Tata Neeliu, Coyote, the war chief of the United Bands. Marshal Flint, to his credit, didn't panic. He was a man of the law, and even in the face of an impossibility, the law was all he had. I am a U.S. Marshal, he called out, his voice straining. We are here on official business. We mean you no harm. Coyote turned his gaze to the marshal. His voice when he spoke was not the high shout of a warrior but the deep, measured baritone of a man in total command. His English was perfect, learned from years and worlds Elias couldn't imagine. We know your business, Coyote said. You are here to arrest this man. He pointed his lance at Elias, for a murder he did not commit. Croft, seeing his plan unraveling, found his voice. This is interference with federal justice. Marshal, Arrest that savage. Coyote ignored him. You seek a man named Thomas O'Malley. Judge Vane sputtered. How? How could you know that name? Because we have him, Coyote said. A wave of confusion passed over the three men. You have him? Marshal Flint asked, lowering his hand from his gun. Is he alive? No, Coyote said simply. He is dead, as you were told. He whistled, a sharp, piercing sound. Two Kiowa riders trotted forward, dragging a body between their horses. They cut it loose, and it slumped in the red dust at the marshal's feet. But it wasn't the body of a railroad surveyor. This man was dressed in range clothes, a gun belt still strapped to his waist. Marshal Flint dismounted, his face grim. He rolled the body over. I know this man, Flint said, his voice hard. This is Art Higgins, a hired gun, works for Mr. Croft. Now, Marshal, I protest. Croft blustered. I have many employees. And this one, Coyote continued, is the man you are looking for. He whistled again. Another rider came forward. This one was leading a horse. Slumped over the saddle was a second man, his hands tied, his face bruised but very much alive. He was shoved to the ground and he landed at Flint's feet, shaking. This, Coyote said, is the other man who works for Mr. Croft, the one who saw his partner, Art Higgins, murder the surveyor O'Malley on Mr. Croft's orders. He was sent to silence Elias Thorne, but he was careless. My scouts found him setting charges to blow the canyon spring. The captured man, a young tough named Billy, looked up at Croft with terrified eyes. I'm sorry, Mr. Croft. They grabbed me. I didn't tell him nothing. He told us everything. Coyote said, his voice flat. He produced a small leather-bound book from his belt and tossed it into the dust by the marshal's boot. And he gave us this. The Surveyor's Journal. The last entry describes a meeting with Mr. Croft. A meeting where Mr. Croft offered him double pay to get lost and sign over the survey rights, and Mr. O'Malley refused. Marshal Flint stared at the journal. He looked at the dead man, Higgins. He looked at the terrified man, Billy. He looked at the railroad tycoon, the corrupt judge, and the 100 silent warriors blocking his exit. The entire filthy conspiracy was laid bare in the canyon dust. Bartholomew Croft, Marshal Flint said, his voice suddenly cold and clear. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, and for the murder of Thomas O'Malley. You can't, Croft screamed, his face purple. I am the railroad. I will have your badge. I'll have all of your... Flint didn't hesitate. He crossed the space in 2 steps and struck Croft across the face with his pistol. The tycoon crumpled from his saddle like a sack of grain. Judge Vane, seeing his protector fall, tried to wheel his horse around. And you, Vane? Flint growled, grabbing the horse's bridle. You're under arrest for conspiracy, fabricating evidence, and abuse of your office. You'll be tried. Just not in your own county. Flint looked at the captured man. Billy, you're a witness. You'll testify, or you'll hang with them. Your choice. I'll talk. I'll testify. I swear. Billy sobbed. Flint bound Croft and Vane, his movements efficient and final. He was a lawman, and the law, however twisted, had finally found its true north. He looked over at Elias, who hadn't moved, his rifle still hanging at his side. Mr. Thorne, it seems my warrant was faulty. My apologies. Elias just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Flint mounted his horse, securing the lead ropes of his prisoners. He looked at the wall of Kiowa warriors, and then at their leader, Coyote. I'm in your debt. Coyote's face remained impassive. The debt is not to you. He turned his magnificent horse and began to ride, not back toward the pass but deeper into the canyon toward Elias. The marshal watched him go. The Cinder Basin is off limits, Flint declared to his prisoners. The railroad will find another pass. He tipped his hat to Elias. Sir. He kicked his horse, dragging his prisoners behind him, and rode out of the canyon. The Kiowa warriors remained, silent, watching him go. Elias stood alone as Coyote dismounted in front of him. The two men faced each other, the space between them filled with 20 years of silence. The Kiowa war chief, the man who commanded 100 warriors, looked at the old, broken rancher. "You are smaller than I remember," Coyote said. It wasn't an insult, it was just a fact. "And you are not," Elias replied, his voice rough. He looked at the warrior, at the scars, at the authority. "I heard stories of a chief called Coyote, a man who united the Kiowa and Comanche, a ghost who raided the reservations and freed his people. I never thought—" "You told me to ride east," Coyote said. "I did. I rode until the horse you gave me fell. I found my people. I learned. I fought. I remembered." "Why?" Elias asked, the one word all he could manage. "Why do this? For me? After what my people did?" Coyote looked up at the high canyon walls, at the spring, at the small lonely cabin. "You were the first, the only one. In a world of fire and blood, you showed me mercy. You gave me a horse. You gave me water. You gave me a life. This," he gestured to the canyon, "is just water, a small debt." Elias shook his head, a tear finally cutting a path through the dust on his cheek. "The debt was mine, son, not yours." Coyote nodded, as if accepting this. He reached to his saddle and unhooked a canteen. He handed it to Elias. It was an old, battered U.S. Army canteen, the same one Elias had given him 20 years ago. Elias took it, his hands shaking. Coyote swung himself back onto his horse. He looked at Elias one last time, his eyes no longer hard but filled with a deep, ancient understanding. "Live well, Elias Thorne. The ghosts are gone." He turned and raised his lance. As one, the 100 warriors turned their horses. They didn't ride out the way they came. They began to move up a narrow, hidden trail on the far side of the canyon, a trail that Elias himself had never known existed. They moved like smoke, disappearing into the high rocks, until the canyon was silent once more. Elias Thorne stood alone in the red dust, clutching the old canteen. He was no longer a Pinkerton. He was no longer a recluse. He was just a man, saved by a ghost of his own making. He uncorked the canteen, raised it to the sky in a silent toast, and finally, after 20 long years, he took a drink. And for the first time, the water didn't taste like ash. It tasted like redemption.